Welcome to this week's episode of the Homeschool How-To. I'm Cheryl, and I invite you to join me on my quest to find out, why are people homeschooling? How do you do it? What are the differences in how people homeschool from region to region? And should I homeschool my kids? Stick with me as I unfold the answers to each of these questions week by week. Thank you for joining us today. Here with me is Johanna, a single working mom that homeschools her 2 children. Johanna, thank you for being here. I'm going to start by having you tell us the ages of your kids and how long you've been homeschooling.
Sure. So I have 2 children. Caleb, my oldest, is 12, and Charlotte is my youngest. She is 10. And we've been homeschooling for, it's 3.5 years now.
What are your reasons for homeschooling?
So many reasons, but basically, we did start out in public school initially. My oldest went through 2nd grade and my youngest through kindergarten. And basically we found like what the public school was standing for and how they go about doing things just no longer worked for my family, essentially. So
right.
Initially, I still thought if something changed, I would consider sending them back. But pretty much once we started homeschooling, we just saw so many benefits. It became even more clear that this was the absolute right path for us. So, and I'm constantly reminded and validated that this was the right decision, and hearing what the alternative would have been.
How did your kids adjust?
So it was definitely an adjustment. Luckily, in some ways, my kids tend to be homebodies, so that was not a concern. And it was just getting in the idea of that, mom sitting them down and doing their curriculum and lessons, and they're certainly more comfortable telling their mom no than they would a teacher at school. So definitely was an adjustment period, but really once we got rolling, it was just having that set those expectations, and that's what we did.
So they both seem to get in the groove with you. I've heard before it takes half the time of the amount of years you were in public school to actually adjust to homeschool. I don't know if you found that to be the case for you.
That's interesting. I'd have to think back. I would say at most. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I would say half the time, maybe even depending on where they start. Certainly if you start from the beginning, that's all they know. Right. My daughter had only been to kindergarten, so that was all she knew. My son, 2nd grade, again, I think deep down knew the benefits and was certainly on board with it.
He was probably okay with not getting up and rushing out the door every morning. But did you ever find that he was saying, oh, I wish I went to school, or I miss my friends?
So luckily we've been able to still stay connected with a lot of friends. So that really wasn't an issue. They weren't tied into, any particular activities that they couldn't do outside of school. So really they were easy.
Perfect. Okay. So now we discussed that you do work from home. How do you do that?
So I do work full time. I do work from home. I have consistently needed some support and some help though along the way. So,
sure.
Especially initially while they were young, I did have a full-time sitter that would come to the house and be able to be with them while I'm working, and then just shifting our schedule. So homeschooling could be done anytime. So we're doing lessons sometimes in evenings and on the weekends, and then they're having as a trade free time during the day to socialize with other homeschoolers, or they, attend different co-ops. So definitely needed some help, but even as they get older, they're a little bit more independent. So I can work while they're doing their own thing as well.
Right. Because I think that's where I battle right now. I've worked for 15 years. And, even if I could work from home, is it fair to my kids if I'm at the computer all day and sticking them in front of a TV so that I can do my work and then working with them later on in the evening? You want it to be a fair balance. But like you said, with having a sitter come in, that's a great plan because, then you can kind of have outline what you'd like for them to do during the day. This much time outside, these activities that may or may not be educational but fun, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clearing that up for us. And, with the homeschooling community, I was thinking too, like for my kids being 4.5 and 6 months old, there are probably older kids that are homeschooled right now looking for jobs, on the job training. Maybe they want to be educators or, something in that field where I could even, hire them, their services to watch my kids while I work during the day, or, even if it's just some days a week, because their schedule, like you said, is so flexible. They could do their homeschooling in the evenings or on the weekends and, work, be nanny or, be a babysitter during the day. So that's really eye-opening.
Yeah. And it's creating it to what works for your family. So that's kind of the huge positive aspect of homeschooling. You're just going to work with what you have and, make it work and tailor it to your family, your schedules, and your children.
Right. So what does homeschooling look like on your best day?
So I would say, on the best day is really they're ready to learn, ready to cooperate, get their work done. They're happy, healthy, and just, again, agreeable. That would probably be a good day in my book.
And are you strict with TV time, iPad time? I know I find myself sometimes, okay, I have to get this done, go sit on your iPad, and then I feel so guilty at the end of the day. But you also have to give yourself a little grace, I think, too.
You have to limit it and within reason, and they will have their free time. But we do try and, limit how much time they're spending on the screen. Or again, if it's educational or if it's something that the kids can do together and play a game interactively, a little bit more lenient there than just, plopping in front of the TV all day. So there's definitely stuff we found that they can take advantage of, and just having stuff on hand from them to do arts and crafts and supplies like that are helpful to keep them off the screens.
Right.
As well.
Right. And the nice weather helps. You're in New York, as I am, and we don't have great weather all year long, but I referenced a book that I had read in my first podcast. There's no such thing as bad weather. Scandinavian woman explains how it doesn't matter if it's cold or rainy. You just put on clothes that suit the weather and get out there. And I guess once you get used to that, you probably have a great time and tires your kids out, and then they're better for you when you need them to actually relax. So what does your worst day of homeschooling look like? Are you able to give yourself that grace to say, they didn't go as planned, but I'm doing it and this is what's best for my kids?
Yes, absolutely. I'd say in the beginning, when we were still figuring it all out, I would have probably said for sure, I'd say, quote unquote, bad day. This is what it looks like. We didn't get anything done. I had so many expectations. But just, reminding yourself that there's going to be days like that, and that will happen, and you really make the most of it and roll with it. So I would say there are not necessarily quote unquote bad days anymore, just because your expectations, that there will be days like that, and you make up for it another time. So that also takes the pressure off a bit, knowing that you have the flexibility, unlike if they were going to a structured public school or private school, that they have an off day. You can't make that up somewhere. So homeschooling, you can.
You're right. Yeah, I think expectations have a big role in that. It's probably the same for like relationships too, right? Day after Valentine's Day, your expectations were real high, and then what? This is all you got me? You lower your expectations, you'll always be pleasantly surprised, right? I'm sure there's somewhere in the middle that works out. So what curriculum do you use? And did you have to go through a couple different kinds till you found one that you liked, or do you use a multitude of them?
Yeah, I'm definitely worked through different ones to see what worked the best. I would say what I envision and would love to be able to do isn't necessarily what we are able to do because of our schedule and our lifestyle. And so, again, trying different things so you find what works. And again, it's part of the beauty of homeschooling that I love, is that fitting, the needs of each child individually. What I do for my son isn't necessarily the same as I do for my daughter. And then some stuff we can combine, even though they're 2 grades apart. So we tend to do a lot of reading. We use a lot of Charlotte Mason living books, essentially. So Build Your Library is one of the curriculums that I've found really works well. It's very laid out what to do each day. and a list of books to get out from the library or purchase, or, you buy used. So we do a lot of that for history and literature and geography, so I love those. Math for my daughter, we used Master Books, which was more of a Charlotte Mason, had a little story attached to it that worked well for her. For my son, since he had started in public school, we actually started out using the curriculum that he was used to and using in school, just as we got adjusted, and then realizing that we didn't need to necessarily stick with that one. There were other options. So we found things like Singapore has a new primary math, so we were using that for my son. Now he's using teaching textbooks, which is they have printed materials, but there's also an online program, so that he can go on, watch the lesson himself, and do the practice work right on the computer. So that's been a wonderful curriculum. My daughter will probably start using that too, because she's just about ready to be able to work more independently on that. And then for science, we've done a variety actually of science, but my favorite is Berean Builders. And it's Science in the Beginning was the first one we completed. So that was wonderful. And we're now moving on to Science in the Ancient World. And it's able to, incorporate some Christian stuff in there that, you don't normally get. So that's been wonderful. And it's very much open, it's scripted, so I can just read the lesson to them, but it's scripted in a way that's like you're teaching the lesson. It's not just boring and dry, it's conversational. So I love that, because I'm not having to, without working full time, I don't have time to be coming up with these lesson plans. So it's all scripted, has experiments, with household items. That's been a wonderful program as well. And then we do some, logic of English. IEW is what my son has done well with. My daughter, we do a lot of different stuff. My daughter uses All About Spelling. She does Write Shop for writing. So it's not one big box curriculum that we use. It's kind of a little bit, what we found has worked for my kids. And they also attend co-ops where they go and learn with other homeschool kids, and the parents volunteer and either teach the classes or assist with the classes. So they're doing some of their curriculum there as well. So I like kind of scripted for the science and the math. Sometimes with the grammar and writing, it's nice. But the living books, just reading for history, literature, poetry, works for our family.
So cool. And you've answered already questions that I had in my first episode where I discussed my fears of homeschooling. How can I teach things that, trigonometry? I don't think I did well in that class. I'm willing to bet. But you don't have to be the teacher for everything. You can just kind of be the facilitator, or even if there was an issue, find a tutor, or the co-ops where you have a parent that is specialized in that field. You can kind of hand off your kid there and then teach what you know to other people's children. And then that kind of helps with the socialization. How long did it take you to learn about all these different curriculums and try them out? Because I started bringing my son to some homeschool play groups 1.5 years ago. And every time I talk to parents, I just find out more and more and more. And once I think, oh, okay, yeah, I know it all, I talk to someone else and my eyes are open even bigger to what's out there. It's truly amazing. I can't imagine how much time it took you to actually, go through it all and find what works. And then once you do, you'll probably switch to something else, because something, even better will come along and more suited for you. But how long did that take?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. So it's kind of continuously reevaluating and finding what works for different stages. And it is the blessing and curse. There's so many out there to choose from, but it also was like, why can't there be 5? And I could just pick from those 5. But once you get into it and realizing having those choices is so invaluable, because again, you can tailor it to your needs and your schedule and your kid and your child's learning needs as well. So it's definitely, initially was just diving in and trying things. And really that first year was, what is our style? What is our working? So it just kind of picking something that you go with your gut and then you try it out. And if it doesn't work, you look to something else. A lot less pressure at the elementary level, because just by nature, what they're learning, it's really very much all about, reading and the math, basic math. So, and then by the time you get to the older, grades and more complicated stuff, you kind of have a little bit better handle. So, again, I think it's an ongoing thing. Yeah, for sure. And for us, it depended. Again, they spend half the time with me and half the time with their father. So I needed some flexibility and stuff that we could do and have lessons one-on-one while they're with me, but then stuff they could also do independently on their own while they were at their father. So.
Sure. So that brings my next question in perfectly. How does your family feel about you homeschooling, and not just their father, but extended family, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles?
Yeah. So that is a huge thing, having the support. So having family that can understand and support you along the way and not be, adversary to any challenges you're having and be supportive is huge. So I do have family that understands it. And, even though, none of us grew up and experienced it, can see the benefits that it's giving to my kids. So, I'm very close with a sister of mine. She's in Pennsylvania, but we're close relationship, and she homeschools her daughter as well. So that's been nice.
Oh, that's so cool.
Kind of had that journey, together. So definitely have the support there. Their father, again, totally new concept to him. Never, imagined in his life that we would be doing this with the children. So it was been quite an adjustment there. But I've taken on a lot of that responsibility and organizing and planning the lessons and really have, been able to, he works full time as well, so he can kind of still manage life there. And I'm able to take on the brunt.
You do what you got to do for your kids. And I guess once you experienced it and saw how they, did with it, it just gave you the drive to keep going. And
I mentioned our sitter that we had, again, her, children went through public school, her grandkids, but, she was learning about it as we were too. And the constant reminders that she's like, this is wonderful. You're giving your kids such a gift, and it's such a wonderful, so having, again, another supportive person to just remind you of that and comparing, different options was helpful too.
Oh, that's awesome. What are the reporting requirements like in New York? I've heard both. I've heard we're strict here, and I've heard we're too lenient.
Yeah, I don't feel it's that bad. So I think where the strict comes from is because in some states you really have to do so little. So that's, I think, where it comes from. Like, oh, wow, you have to do all that in New York, but not knowing or ever experienced one where you just don't have to do much. What they do require, I don't feel is too unreasonable. So it's, some initial paperwork to get started. And then there is a plan that you, at the beginning of the school year, you're laying out for what you'll be doing. And then once a quarter, a report that you did what you're saying you're going to do, but they're not scrutinizing anything in general. All school districts are a little bit different, but our experience is that they're checking a box to say that you submitted your paperwork. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy or detailed. It's just, they're just, they have to check their box and say that you did it. So in my opinion, it's really not too bad.
Okay. And do you submit that to the school or to the state?
It goes to the school district where you live.
Okay. Yeah. So for sports, has that been an issue, or do you think that will be an issue with any of your kids?
Luckily, we have not had any issues, finding things that the kids like and be able to do outside of, the public school setting. They both play tennis, they both play golf, gymnastics. So there's no lack of any kind of activity as far as that goes. So, tons of options for, community basketball and soccer programs. So in at least in our area, there's a lot of those opportunities, even if you're not in the public school setting.
Okay. But you can't play like football with the school, right? I think in some states they have to allow homeschoolers. In New York, they cannot, correct?
In New York, no, they absolutely do not. You can't participate in any of those organized sports. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, I know for me and probably a lot of us that are going back and forth on, do I homeschool my children or not, have this vision of, but the high school football games and, my son being the quarterback and winning, and the whole community is there. And, you have this vision in your head. the reality of it is probably quite different. I don't know, maybe it's because I watched Friday Night Lights or something. But especially in upstate New York, I mean, we don't really have, like, football's not really that big of a thing. Basketball definitely is, but I know we have travel teams that homeschoolers can be on. So there are options. I think we have to let go of these expectations. Again, just like we talked about earlier, lower the expectations. Probably wasn't going to work out like that anyways, and look at all of the opportunity that is available out there. I know for us, we have our son in swim lessons at the YMCA and wrestling at, a community-based wrestling facility that is not attached to a school. So those are all things he can remain doing, even if I homeschool him. He's due for kindergarten in September. So I got a couple months to really lay out a plan. And you know what? The nice part about it is if I homeschool and decide maybe it's not for us, I guess you can always go to school or vice versa. But I am a planner, and and I figured I've been asking for a year and a half to every homeschooler I meet, and all the students and the adults. And I just find it so interesting. And one day I was like, why don't I put this in a podcast? Because if I find this so interesting, I'm sure other people will too. And I've listened to homeschooling podcasts, but they don't often do interviews, across the board. They kind of explain their experience, which is great. But sometimes it gives me a little anxiety too, because I'm like, oh, they sound so diligent and motivated. And can I do that? Can that be me? But, it, like you said, we just take it day by day and find out what works. And as you get used to it, I think the pressure comes off a little bit. So what are some of the unexpected benefits that have happened to you since you and your family started homeschooling?
Sure. So I definitely look back to a couple, I'd say even minor health issues that my kids had. Nothing crazy, but I look back and I am thankful that they were homeschooled at those times, because I can't imagine how they would have struggled, if they were in public school while dealing with those issues. Not to mention they might have been missing out on school. And just by having them home, you can keep a better eye on them. You can tend to their needs and still get your schoolwork done at the same time. It's because you'd have that adjustment for what their needs are. So that was one big thing that I look back and it was like, oh, wow, like that's another good point. I'm glad we were homeschooling at that time. So another unexpected benefit was when COVID hit and things shut down, we were already homeschooling at that point. So we were able to basically continue school life as usual. It didn't impact us too much there. Yeah.
Nobody was masking in your house.
Subject. No, exactly. We could it was somewhat business as usual, other than we couldn't go some of our usual places that we would like to go to or for social, wasn't there. But as far as keeping going with the school and the curriculum, that was fine. And then not being subject to what the, different rules that the schools were doing to handle COVID. So that was definitely another unexpected. That did not know going into COVID we would be experiencing that, but looking back, that was a blessing.
Absolutely. All right. And did you have any fears before you started homeschooling? I know the socialization is a big thing that I'm not sure if society puts that on us, that, oh my God, they're not going to be socialized. Or did you have any other fears? Like, one of my fears was sometimes my kids drive me nuts. So what do you do?
For me, I mean, when I decide to do something, I'm kind of all in, and there's no space for fear. It's just dive in. Awesome. Let's figure this out. But going back to what you were saying before about thinking what you might miss out by homeschooling, and there was sort of a mourning period, like what I thought my kids might be missing out on by not going to public school. So that I guess initially could have been thought of as kind of a fear, but you just gradually realize that those same opportunities are there for homeschoolers, and even if they aren't exactly the football games and those kind of experiences, homecoming, whatever, you really start to zero in what's most important in life, and does that matter? And your kids never experienced that. I think we mourn it because we know we went through it and that was part of our growing up and experience, but it doesn't have to be theirs. They're going to replace it with other types of experiences and things that they're getting to do that kids that are in the public school don't. We can take off and go to New York City and go to museums and homeschool there and have all these, wonderful. We're not limited to when we go away on vacations and things like that. So it's just putting that in perspective and, just again, realizing what's most important and then realizing you're really not, missing out really much at all. So
you even gave me chills because you're the second person that said, yep, your kids will be missing out on some things, but they're going to gain so much more. And I think that was the first time I was like, oh yeah, it is okay that they are missing out on certain things. That's okay because there are other things we are doing to, fill that bucket back up and maybe even more. That's really beautiful. And when you do think about those lines at Disney, not that we'd be going to Disney, but everybody's there that week in February and that week in April. Not us.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we're not tied to that at all, which is great.
All right. So do you have any time for yourself?
So that's
other than this podcast that you are recording right now.
I will say it's probably good that I don't have my kids on certain days because they're with their dad, because if I did have them all the time, I probably would rarely take a break. I'm just very into my kids, but whether I want to or not, I do have consistent days without them for myself. And that's, when I'm, taking time to, for myself, but getting other things done so that when I do have them, I can be at my best. So if you do have them more full time, then, my advice is, still finding ways to get that break and take time for yourself and have that separation, because you do ultimately need that to refresh and be the best you can be when you have them. So it's a tough balance.
Get that sitter or reach out to family. And I know that's easier said than done, but even the other older homeschoolers that are just, looking for the experience, the money, they have the days free and they're probably really good kids, so that's definitely, maybe I can set up a little network there. That'll be my next endeavor.
Yes.
What would the you today tell your pre-homeschooling self?
Oh, I think we've touched on this a couple times, so I'll relate it back to that. Finding that support and community that knows, what you're going through would be my advice for myself getting started. Like, and immediately find those people that you can connect with and are also homeschooling, and be able to socialize with them, go to them for advice and for that support. So and I was lucky to have that community, and it's absolutely been a savior. So I think for many reasons, having that community and tribe or support is invaluable.
Okay. So everyone talks about, oh, you can't homeschool your kids. They'll be weird. Johanna, are your kids weird?
They're not weird, no. I mean, they're weird in any sense that the kids would be weird, whether they're
all weird,
or not.
right?
But,
every kid's weird.
It's
every adult's weird these days.
Exactly. So, and the stigma with socializing. I mean, we've never had an issue and opportunities to socialize, and my kids have friends in both their neighborhoods, and kids that go to public school, kids that are homeschool, all walks of life, and they attend those co-ops and get out in tennis and gymnastics and golf. And so it's really such a small portion of their life is about being homeschooled in a way, because they're experiencing so many other things and with other people. So yes, right. There has been an old stigma with homeschool kids, but I know a lot of homeschool kids and they're pretty not well weird adapted. To me.
Well,
exactly.
Yeah. And then you think about the last couple of years, we've normalized, sitting in a classroom 6 feet apart with a mask over you and plexiglass around you and putting on hand sanitizer every 30 minutes. So who's going to turn out weird here? Come on.
Exactly.
Well, I thank you so much. This has truly been a pleasure and an eye-opening experience. I love this conversation. I'm so happy to have you kick off this podcast for me. You really are getting me excited about having these experiences with my kids and really taking control of their life and what they get to learn. And I get to learn with them and the bonding that will create for us. So I'm very excited and I'm truly touched by your interview today. Thank you so much for taking this time.
Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to check out any of the curriculum that was mentioned today, please pop into the show notes where I've listed them all there. Next week, we will be joined by Julie, who transitions families from the public school life to the homeschool life. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Homeschool How-To. If you enjoyed what you've heard, please share with friends, like and subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review.